The stars looked different through the viewport of the UES horizon as Captain Jake Morrison watched the massive alien world grow larger on the screen. 3 months of travel through space had brought his small team to Nexus Prime, the capital world of the Zephyrian Empire. Jake felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders because this mission could change everything for humanity. Amy Carter stood beside him looking at the planet below. She was a quiet woman with steady hands and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her military uniform was neat and proper, but Jake knew there was much more to Amy than what people could see. She had been the best shooter on Earth before joining the Space Force. 3 gold medals from the Olympics sat in a box back on Earth, but Amy never talked about them. Ryan Bell and Lisa Stone were checking their diplomatic papers for the 10th time that morning. They were good at their jobs, but this was their first time meeting aliens. Everyone was nervous except Amy, who seemed calm as always. Jake had picked her for this mission because she stayed cool under pressure and because someone had told him she could shoot the wings off a fly at 100 meters. The ship's computer announced they would dock in 30 minutes. Jake gathered his team in the main cabin and looked at each of them. Ryan was sweating even though the ship was cool. Lisa kept checking her translation device. Amy just listened with her hands folded in her lap. "Remember what we practiced?" Jake said. "These Zephyrians are warriors first and everything else second. They respect strength, but they also value honor. Don't show fear, but don't act tough either. Just be professional and let me do most of the talking." Amy nodded along with the others, but Jake could see she was thinking about something else. She had been reading reports about Zephyrian culture for weeks. Their society was built around military strength and combat skills. Every citizen served in their army and their leaders were chosen by fighting tournaments. They had conquered 17 star systems in the last 50 years. The docking process took 20 minutes, and then they were walking through the alien station toward the transport that would take them to the planet's surface. Jake had seen pictures of Zephyrians, but meeting them in person was different. They were tall and covered in scales that changed color in the light. Their eyes were large and golden, and they moved like predators even when they were just standing. Around, the transport was twice the size of anything humans had built, and it flew so smoothly that Jake barely felt it move. Through the windows he could see cities that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The buildings were made of crystal and metal that reflected the light of Nexus Prime's twin suns. Everything looked clean and organized like a military base. Emperor Vextar's palace was the largest building Jake had ever seen. It rose from the center of the capital city like a mountain made of blue crystal. Thousands of Zephyrian soldiers lined the streets as their transport moved through the city. Jake noticed that Amy was watching everything with the same careful attention she gave to everything else. Inside the palace, they were led through halls filled with weapons and battle trophies from dozens of worlds. Paintings on the walls showed Zephyrian warriors in combat against strange alien creatures. Everything spoke of a culture that lived for war and conquest. Jake hoped his small team would be able to convince these people that humans were worth making friends with. The throne room was bigger than a football field, with a ceiling so high that Jake could barely see it. Emperor Vextar sat on a throne made from black metal and red gems. He was larger than the other Zephyrians, and his scales were deeper gold. When he spoke, his voice filled the entire room. "So these are the humans we have heard whispers about," the Emperor said. His words came through their translation devices with a slight delay. "Small creatures from a small world who think they are ready to join the great powers of the galaxy." Jake stepped forward and gave the formal greeting they had practiced. He explained that humanity wanted to join the Galactic Trade Consortium and offered gifts from Earth. The Emperor listened, but Jake could see he was not impressed. Several other Zephyrians stood around the throne and they whispered among themselves. In their own language, the formal dinner that night was held in a smaller room, but it was still large enough to hold 500 people. Jake and his team sat at a table near the Emperor while Zephyrian nobles filled the rest of the room. The food was strange but edible, and the conversation was polite but distant. Amy had been quiet most of the evening. But Jake noticed she kept looking at the weapons displayed on the walls. There were rifles and pistols and blade weapons from across the galaxy. Some looked like they belonged in museums, while others seemed brand new. All of them were decorated with precious metals and gems. "You seem interested in our weapons collection?" General Korthak said to Amy. He was the Emperor's military advisor and one of their greatest warriors. "Do humans know anything about the warrior arts?" Amy looked at the weapons for a moment before answering. "I know a little about marksmanship," she said. "Those plasma rifles are beautiful. Are they just for show, or do they actually work?" The general smiled, and Jake could see his sharp teeth. "These are ceremonial weapons used in our sacred shooting competitions. Only our finest warriors are allowed to touch them. They require great skill and strength to use properly." Amy nodded and asked a few more questions about how the weapons worked and what the competitions involved. Jake could see other Zephyrians at nearby tables listening to the conversation. Some of them started to chuckle when Amy showed interest in their weapons. Perhaps the small human female would like to try her hand at our basic training course. Emperor Vextar said suddenly. The entire room went quiet. It might be amusing to see how humans measure against true warriors. The laughter started low but quickly spread through the room. Hundreds of Zephyrian nobles found the idea hilarious. Jake felt his stomach drop because he knew this could ruin everything they had worked for. But Amy just looked at the Emperor with the same calm expression she always had. "I would be honored to accept your challenge," Amy said clearly so everyone could hear. The laughter got louder, and Jake watched 3 months of careful planning fall apart around him. Amy sat in her guest room that night staring at her datapad screen. The Zephyrian palace was quiet except for the distant sounds of guards walking the halls. She had downloaded every piece of information she could find about Zephyrian military training and weapons. The videos showed warriors moving with incredible speed and precision as they fired at targets that would challenge even the best human soldiers. Captain Morrison had knocked on her door 3 times in the past hour. Each time Amy told him she was fine and that she knew what she was doing. She could hear Ryan and Lisa talking in worried voices through the thin walls. They thought she had made a terrible mistake that would end their mission before it really started. Amy understood their concerns, but she also knew something they did not. She had spent years studying the psychology of competition, and she recognized what had happened in the throne room. Emperor Vextar had not been trying to humiliate her. He had been testing her to see how she would react under pressure. The laughter from his nobles was real, but the challenge itself was something else entirely. The datapad showed her detailed recordings of Zephyrian shooting competitions. She watched warriors fire plasma rifles at targets hundreds of meters away while moving at full speed. Their accuracy was impressive, but Amy noticed things that others might miss. They relied heavily on their natural reflexes and superior eyesight. Their movements were instinctive and aggressive, like predators hunting prey. Dr. Helen Ross had provided biological data about the Zephyrian species. Their eyes could see across a broader spectrum than human eyes, and they could track multiple moving objects at once. Their nervous systems processed information 30% faster than humans, which gave them incredible reaction times. Their muscle fibers were denser and stronger, which meant they could handle heavier weapons without fatigue. All of these advantages should have made them unbeatable in any shooting competition. But Amy saw weaknesses that came with those same advantages. The Zephyrians fired quickly and moved constantly, because their instincts told them to strike fast and overwhelm their enemies. They did not take time to analyze wind patterns or calculate complex trajectories. They trusted their eyes and reflexes to guide them to victory. Amy had learned a different approach during her years of Olympic competition. Human shooters could not rely on superior biology, so they had to develop superior technique. Every breath had to be controlled. Every muscle had to be relaxed except for the ones needed to hold the rifle steady. The mind had to be completely calm and focused on nothing except the target. She pulled up recordings of her own competitions from 5 years ago. The young woman on the screen looked so different from the military officer she had become. Olympic Amy wore bright uniforms and smiled for cameras. Military Amy wore dark clothing and preferred to stay in the background. But the shooting technique was exactly the same. The videos showed her winning gold medals in 3 different events. In each competition she had faced shooters who were younger or stronger or who had better equipment. But Amy had won because she never let pressure affect her performance. While other competitors got nervous and rushed their shots, Amy took her time and trusted her training. One recording showed her breaking a world record that had stood for 8 years. The commentator explained how Amy had achieved perfect scores in conditions that other shooters found impossible. Wind gusts had been changing direction every few seconds and the light had been fading as clouds moved across the sun. But Amy had adapted to each change and placed every shot exactly where she intended. Amy closed the competition videos and returned to studying Zephyrian weapons. Their plasma rifles used contained energy bursts instead of physical bullets. The energy bolt traveled at nearly the speed of light, but the rifle still had recoil and muzzle flash. Most importantly, the weapons had computer systems that tracked ammunition and calculated basic ballistics. She found technical specifications that showed exactly how the rifles worked. The energy cells held enough power for 200 shots. The targeting system could highlight potential targets, but it did not automatically adjust for distance or environmental factors. The rifle weighed twice as much as standard human weapons, but the grip and trigger system looked similar enough that Amy thought she could adapt quickly. The more she studied, the more confident she became. Zephyrian training focused on combat situations where speed and aggression were most important. Their competitions were designed to test warriors who would face enemy soldiers in battle. But tomorrow's challenge would be different. Tomorrow would be about pure marksmanship skills with no enemies shooting back and no time pressure except what she put on herself. Amy set down the datapad and began her evening meditation routine. She sat cross-legged on the floor and closed her eyes while controlling her breathing. This was something she had done every night for 10 years. Meditation helped her mind become completely calm and focused. It also helped her body learn to relax all unnecessary muscle tension. She visualized herself holding the Zephyrian plasma rifle. In her mind, she could feel its weight and balance. She imagined aiming at targets and squeezing the trigger with smooth, steady pressure. She rehearsed the challenge over and over until it felt like a memory instead of something that had not happened yet. A soft knock interrupted her meditation. Amy opened her eyes and found Captain Morrison standing in her doorway. He looked tired and worried as he stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "Amy, I need to know if you really understand what you've gotten us into," Jake said. "These aliens are not impressed by human determination or fighting spirit. They respect results and nothing else. If you fail tomorrow, it won't just embarrass you. It will convince them that humanity is weak and not worth their time." Amy looked at her captain and saw genuine fear in his eyes. Jake was a good leader and a brave man, but he did not understand what she was capable of. Very few people did because Amy had never felt the need to boast about her abilities. "Captain, do you know why I left Olympic shooting to join the military?" Amy asked. Jake shook his head. He had read her file, but it only contained basic facts about her service record and previous achievements. "I left because I had won everything there was to win and I was bored," Amy said. "For 3 years I competed against the best shooters from every nation on Earth and I never lost a single event. Not one. The sport became too easy and I needed a new challenge." She stood up and walked to the window that showed the alien city, sparkling under the light of twin moons. "Tomorrow I get to shoot with weapons I have never used before at targets designed by aliens who think humans are inferior," Amy said. "This is exactly the kind of challenge I have been looking for." Jake stared at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Just promise me you know what you're doing." Amy smiled for the first time since they had arrived on Nexus Prime. "Captain, I always know what I'm doing." The Imperial firing range looked like something from a nightmare built by engineers. Amy stood at the entrance watching hundreds of Zephyrian soldiers gather in the viewing areas above the shooting floor. The complex stretched for several kilometers. in every direction with targets ranging from simple circles to holographic battlefields that seemed to shift and move on their own. Emperor Vextar arrived exactly at the scheduled time, wearing ceremonial armor that gleamed like liquid gold. General Korthak walked beside him carrying a plasma rifle that looked like it had been crafted by artists instead of weapons makers. The crowd of soldiers pressed forward to get better views as the Emperor approached the firing line. Amy had arrived 30 minutes early to study the range layout and observe other shooters practicing. She watched young Zephyrian recruits attempting basic qualification courses and noted how they moved and aimed. Their technique was exactly what she had expected after studying the videos. Fast, aggressive movements with shots fired quickly and instinctively. Captain Morrison stood behind Amy looking like he might be sick. Ryan and Lisa flanked him wearing expressions that suggested they were attending a funeral instead of a shooting competition. Dr. Ross had remained at the palace claiming she needed to study soil samples, but Amy suspected the real reason was that she could not bear to watch what might happen. Human Amy Carter, Emperor Vextar announced in his deep voice that carried across the entire range. You have accepted our challenge to prove your species' worth through the warrior arts. Do you understand the terms of this contest? Amy stepped forward and looked directly at the Emperor without showing any sign of fear or nervousness. I understand that I will complete 3 stages of marksmanship testing using your weapons and your standards. I accept these terms completely. The Emperor gestured toward General Korthak, who began explaining the challenge structure. The first stage involved precision shooting at static targets placed at increasing distances. Recruits were expected to hit at least 60% of their shots. Trained soldiers typically achieve 70 to 80% accuracy. Only elite warriors consistently scored above 90%. The second stage tested ability to engage multiple moving targets. It appeared randomly across a complex environment. The targets moved at different speeds and followed unpredictable patterns. This stage separated competent soldiers from true warriors because it required split-second decision-making combined with perfect accuracy. The final stage was their ultimate test called the Crucible. It combined precision shooting with tactical movement and moral decision-making in a holographic combat simulation. Only 50 Zephyrians in their entire military had ever completed the Crucible with passing scores. General Korthak himself held the current record with 847 points out of a possible 1,000. The weapon you will use is a standard Zephyrian battle rifle, General Korthak said as he presented the plasma weapon to Amy. It fires contained energy bursts with enough power to penetrate heavy armor. The recoil is significant and the weight may challenge someone of your size. Amy accepted the rifle and immediately noticed several things about its design. The weapon was indeed heavy at nearly twice the weight of human rifles, but the balance was actually quite good. The grip fit her hands well enough, and the trigger had a crisp, clean break that reminded her of high-end competition rifles. The targeting system displayed information directly on a small screen mounted above the barrel. I would like to fire a few practice shots to familiarize myself with the weapon characteristics, Amy said. Several Zephyrians laughed at this request. General Korthak explained that true warriors adapted to new weapons instantly through superior instincts and reflexes. Taking time for practice shots was considered a sign of weakness or incompetence. Amy ignored the laughter and waited patiently until the general grudgingly allowed her 3 practice shots at a basic target. She raised the rifle and spent nearly a minute studying the sight picture and feeling the weapon's balance. The crowd grew restless and some soldiers made comments about humans being too slow and cautious for real combat. The first practice shot surprised everyone, including Amy. The plasma bolt struck the target, but several centimeters to the left of where she had aimed. The recoil was sharper than she had expected, and the energy discharge created a bright flash that temporarily affected her vision. Amy made mental notes about both factors and prepared for her second shot. She adjusted her aim to compensate for the rifle's tendency to pull left and controlled her breathing more carefully to handle the recoil. The second shot landed closer to her intended point, but still not exactly where she wanted it. The targeting computer displayed impact data that helped her understand the weapon's ballistics. The third practice shot hit within 1 centimeter of perfect center. Amy nodded with satisfaction and announced she was ready to begin the actual challenge. The Zephyrian crowd had grown quiet as they watched her methodical approach to learning the weapon. General Korthak led Amy to the first firing position where 10 targets waited at ranges from 50 to 500 meters. The closest targets were simple circles that any competent shooter should hit easily. The distant targets were much smaller and required precise aim to score hits in the designated scoring zones. Amy approached the firing line and took her stance. She had modified her normal Olympic shooting position slightly to accommodate the heavier weapon and different balance point. Her breathing became slow and controlled as she entered the focused mental state that had won her 3 gold medals. The first target was so close that missing would have been embarrassing. Amy placed the crosshairs exactly in the center and squeezed the trigger with steady pressure. The plasma bolt struck dead center, creating a perfect score. She moved smoothly to the second target without rushing or celebrating. Each shot followed the same pattern. Amy would study the target briefly to account for distance and any environmental factors. She would control her breathing and clear her mind of all distractions. The trigger squeeze was always smooth and consistent. Every plasma bolt found its mark with precision that impressed even the skeptical Zephyrian observers. The distant targets required more careful calculation as Amy compensated for the plasma bolts' slight energy decay over long ranges, she noticed. That wind had minimal effect on the energy bursts, but atmospheric density did cause small variations in trajectory. Each shot built on lessons learned from previous shots as she adapted to the alien weapon. When the 10th target registered a perfect center hit, the scoring system displayed her results. Amy had achieved 100% accuracy with an average score that exceeded what most Zephyrian warriors managed after years of training. The crowd had fallen completely silent as they stared at numbers that seemed impossible. General Korthak checked the scoring system twice before announcing the results. His voice carried a note of surprise that he tried to hide. Emperor Vexstar leaned forward on his throne with new interest in his golden eyes. Stage 1 complete with perfect scores, the general announced. Human Amy Carter will now attempt Stage 2. Amy handed the rifle back to be reloaded and looked up at the Emperor. For the first time since arriving on Nexus Prime, she allowed herself a small smile. "I'm ready for the moving targets," she said. The second stage firing range looked like a 3-dimensional maze filled with obstacles and platforms at different heights. Holographic projectors created targets that appeared randomly throughout the complex environment and moved in patterns that defied prediction. Amy studied the setup for several minutes while General Korthak explained the scoring system. 25 targets would appear during a 5-minute period. Each target remained visible for only 10 seconds before disappearing. The targets moved at different speeds and followed paths that took them behind cover and around obstacles. Hitting a target in the center zone earned 10 points, while edge hits earned 5 points. Missing completely earned nothing. Our finest warriors typically achieve 15 to 18 hits during this stage, General Korthak said. The current training record is 22 hits set by Commander Zeltar of the 7th Fleet. No recruit has ever hit more than 12 targets. Amy nodded and checked the plasma rifle's energy cell display. She had enough power for 40 shots, which meant she could afford to miss some targets without running out of ammunition. More importantly, she had learned the weapon's characteristics during the first stage and felt confident in her ability to place shots accurately. Emperor Vexstar gave the signal to begin, and the first target materialized near the far end of the range. It was a glowing red sphere about the size of a basketball moving in a straight line from left to right behind partial cover. Amy tracked its movement for 3 seconds to establish its speed and trajectory, then fired when she calculated it would emerge from behind an obstacle. The plasma bolt struck the target dead center just as it appeared in the gap she had predicted. The target flashed green to indicate a perfect hit before disappearing. Amy immediately began scanning for the next target while the Zephyrian crowd murmured in surprise. Target after target appeared throughout the complex range, and Amy engaged each one with calculated precision. She did not fire rapidly or try to rush shots at difficult targets. Instead, she chose her moments carefully and only fired when she was confident of achieving a hit. Her training had taught her that one accurate shot was worth 10 hasty misses. Target appeared high above the range, moving in a spiral pattern that would make it extremely difficult to hit. Amy tracked its movement for 6 seconds while calculating lead angles and trajectory. When she fired, the plasma bolt traveled in a perfect arc that intercepted the target at exactly the right moment. Another perfect center hit flashed green. Before the target vanished, the crowd was no longer murmuring. Hundreds of Zephyrian soldiers watched in complete silence as Amy continued hitting targets that their own warriors struggled with. Her movements were smooth and economical without any wasted motion or unnecessary haste. Each shot seemed to flow naturally into the next as she tracked and engaged targets across the entire range. 2 targets appeared simultaneously on opposite sides of the range, moving in different directions. Amy engaged the closer target first, with a quick shot that caught it at the edge of the scoring zone. She immediately swung to track the second target, which was moving behind a series of vertical barriers. Her shot found the gap between barriers at exactly the right moment to score another center hit. "Impossible," someone whispered from the viewing area. General Korthak was staring at Amy with an expression that mixed disbelief with growing respect. Even Emperor Vextar had risen from his throne to get a better view of the human, who was rewriting their understanding of marksmanship. Amy continued engaging targets with methodical precision. A fast-moving target that appeared for only 5 seconds received a perfect shot. A target that moved erratically in zigzag patterns was hit on her second attempt. 2 more simultaneous targets were both hit with shots fired less than 2 seconds apart. The final target appeared with only 30 seconds remaining in the stage. It was smaller than the others and moved in a complex 3-dimensional pattern that took it high and low while also moving laterally. Amy watched it complete one full cycle of its movement pattern, then fired at the exact moment it reached the point where she had calculated it would be most vulnerable. The shot was perfect. The small target flashed green and disappeared just as the time limit expired. Amy lowered her rifle and turned to face the scoring display while the range systems calculated her results. The numbers that appeared on the screen caused an audible gasp from the Zephyrian observers. Amy had engaged all 25 targets and achieved 24 hits. 22 of those hits were perfect center shots worth 10 points each. The 2 edge hits contributed 5 points each. Her total score was 230 points out of a possible 250. General Korthak stared at the display for a long moment before walking over to check the range systems personally. He spent several minutes examining the equipment to ensure there had been no malfunction or error in the scoring. When he finally turned back to announce the results, his voice carried a note of awe that he could not hide. "Stage 2 complete," he said. "Human Amy Carter has achieved 24 hits out of 25 targets with a total score of 230 points. This performance exceeds all previous records by a significant margin." Emperor Vextar descended from his throne and approached Amy directly. His golden eyes studied her with new understanding as he spoke. "Your marksmanship abilities are clearly exceptional by any standard. However, the final stage will test much more than accuracy. The Crucible requires tactical thinking, moral judgment, and the ability to perform under extreme pressure. Are you prepared for this challenge?" Amy met the Emperor's gaze without flinching. "I understand that the Crucible combines shooting with decision-making in a combat simulation. I'm ready to attempt your ultimate test." The Emperor nodded slowly. "Very well. General Korthak will explain the parameters of the Crucible. I warn you that this simulation has broken the spirits of warriors who had served with distinction for decades. It is designed to test every aspect of a soldier's capabilities, under conditions that push both mind and body to their limits." Amy handed her rifle to a technician for reloading and followed the general toward the entrance to the crucible chamber. Captain Morrison caught her eye and gave her a thumbs-up signal. Ryan and Lisa looked terrified, but they also looked hopeful. For the first time since the challenge had begun, the crucible chamber was a massive, spherical room lined with holographic projectors and environmental systems. As Amy stepped inside, she could feel the air pressure change and smell artificial scents that suggested urban environments and smoke from weapons fire. The chamber could simulate any battlefield conditions and present scenarios that tested every skill a warrior might need. "The simulation will last 15 minutes, General Korthak explained. "You must navigate through various combat situations while making split-second decisions about targets. Civilians and tactical choices. Some targets are enemies that must be eliminated. Others are civilians or allies that must not be harmed. Your score depends on accuracy, speed, and judgment." Amy nodded and checked her rifle one final time. The energy cell was fully charged and all systems showed green on the weapons display. She took a deep breath and entered the calm, focused state that had carried her through every major competition of her career. "Begin simulation," General Korthak announced. The chamber transformed around Amy, as holographic projectors created a war-torn city street filled with smoke and the sounds of distant fighting. The holographic city materialized around Amy with startling realism. She found herself standing on a debris-filled street surrounded by damaged buildings and the sound of weapons fire in the distance. Smoke drifted across her field of vision, while emergency sirens wailed from somewhere in the maze of structures ahead. Her first challenge appeared within seconds. 3 figures emerged from a doorway 50 meters ahead. 2 carried weapons and moved with the aggressive posture of enemy soldiers. The third was clearly a civilian trying to flee from the armed figures. Amy had less than 5 seconds to identify the threats and take appropriate action. She fired twice in rapid succession, hitting both armed figures with perfect center shots that neutralized them instantly. The civilian continued running toward her position, and Amy lowered her weapon to show she posed no threat. The simulation awarded her full points for threat identification and proper use of force. Amy moved forward through the simulated city following tactical principles she had learned during military training. She used cover effectively and checked corners carefully before exposing herself to potential ambush. The crucible was testing much more than marksmanship, and Amy understood that every decision would affect her final score. A sniper fired at her from a window 3 stories above the street. Amy heard the energy bolt hiss past her ear before she identified the shooter's location. She rolled behind cover and then used her rifle's scope to locate the muzzle flash. Her return shot eliminated the threat with a single precise hit to the sniper's position. The simulation presented increasingly complex scenarios. As Amy progressed through the virtual battlefield, she encountered enemy soldiers mixed with civilians in situations that required split-second judgment calls. A figure in military uniform turned out to be a friendly ally who provided important information. Another apparent civilian was actually an enemy operative who had to be stopped before reaching an explosive device. Amy's military training served her well as she navigated each challenge with careful analysis and controlled responses. She never fired unless she was certain of her target, and she never hesitated when action was required. Her shooting remained flawlessly accurate even under the stress of simulated combat conditions. The most difficult test came when Amy discovered a group of enemy soldiers holding hostages in a building. She had to eliminate multiple threats without harming the innocent people who were positioned deliberately close to the armed enemies. The scenario required patience and precise marksmanship that pushed her abilities to their limits. Amy studied the situation for 30 seconds before acting. She identified 7 enemy soldiers positioned at different levels throughout the building. Each one had to be eliminated with a single shot because any survivor would have time to harm the hostages. The shooting sequence had to be perfect. She began with the highest threat and worked systematically through each target. 7 shots fired in less than 15 seconds eliminated all enemy soldiers without injury to any hostage. The simulation awarded maximum points for tactical planning and execution. Under pressure, as the 15-minute simulation neared its end, Amy faced a final moral choice that would determine her ultimate score. She discovered that the enemy leader was wounded and defenseless, but still possessed critical information needed to save civilian lives. She could execute him for his crimes or spare him to obtain the information. Amy chose to disarm the enemy leader and secure the information that would save the civilians. The simulation ended with her helping wounded allies while enemy prisoners were taken into custody. She had chosen mercy and justice over revenge. Even in the heat of simulated combat, the holographic city faded away, leaving Amy standing alone in the spherical chamber. Her breathing was controlled and steady despite the intensity of the simulation. She had used 43 shots and achieved 43 hits, including several that required extraordinary skill under pressure. General Korthak entered the chamber carrying a datapad that displayed her results. His expression showed a mixture of disbelief and respect that he no longer tried to hide. He studied the numbers for a long moment before speaking. "Human Amy Carter," he announced formally. "You have completed the Crucible simulation with perfect accuracy and optimal tactical decisions in every scenario. Your final score is 1,000 points." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of electronic systems. Emperor Vextar stepped forward with his golden eyes wide with amazement. No one in 300 years of Zephyrian military tradition had ever achieved a perfect score in their ultimate test. "Impossible," someone whispered from the observation deck. The simulation was designed to be unbeatable. No warrior could possibly achieve perfection in every category. But the scoring systems did not lie. Amy had hit every target she needed to hit while avoiding every target she needed to avoid. Her tactical decisions had been flawless, and her moral choices had shown wisdom beyond her years. She had accomplished something that Zephyrian military scientists had believed was impossible. Emperor Vextar approached Amy and spoke in a voice filled with newfound respect. "In 3 centuries of Zephyrian civilization, no warrior has ever achieved what you have accomplished today. You have demonstrated skills that exceed our finest soldiers and judgment that would honor our greatest leaders." Amy stood at attention while the Emperor continued speaking. "I owe you an apology for my laughter yesterday evening. I allowed prejudice and ignorance to cloud my judgment about your capabilities and those of your species. You have earned not only my respect but the respect of every warrior in this room." General Korthak stepped forward carrying one of the ceremonial plasma rifles from the palace weapon collection. "Human Amy Carter," he said formally, "I present you with this weapon as a symbol of your achievement. You are hereby granted the rank of Honorary War Master in the Zephyrian Empire. No alien has ever received this honor." Amy accepted the rifle with appropriate ceremony while hundreds of Zephyrian soldiers stood at attention in the observation areas. Captain Morrison looked like he might cry with relief and pride. Ryan and Lisa were smiling for the first time since arriving on Nexus Prime. Emperor Vextar raised his hand for silence before making his final announcement. The original purpose of this visit was to discuss humanity's entry into the Galactic Trade Consortium. After witnessing the capabilities of your species, I propose something far more significant. The Zephyrian Empire offers humanity a full military alliance with complete access to our technology and territories. The Emperor paused to let his words sink in before continuing. Any species capable of producing warriors of such exceptional skill deserves to be treated as equals rather than supplicants. We would be honored to call humans our allies and friends." Amy stepped forward and looked directly at the Emperor. "Your Majesty, I accept your alliance offer on behalf of humanity, but I want you to understand something important. What you witnessed today was not the result of superior human biology or natural gifts. It was the result of discipline, training, and determination that any person can develop." She gestured toward the weapon in her hands. "These skills can be taught to others. Human techniques for marksmanship and tactical thinking could benefit your warriors just as Zephyrian technology and knowledge could benefit humanity. A true alliance means learning from each other." Emperor Vexstar smiled, showing his sharp teeth, and what Amy had learned was a gesture of genuine pleasure among his people. War Master Carter, I believe this alliance will be more beneficial than either of our species imagined. We have much to learn from each other. As they prepared to leave the firing range, Amy reflected on how much had changed in a single day. She had come to Nexus Prime as part of a minor diplomatic mission, hoping to gain trading rights for humanity. She was leaving as an honored war master, carrying a treaty that would transform humanity's place in the galaxy. The laughter that had filled the throne room the previous evening now seemed like something from another lifetime. Amy had proven that respect could not be demanded or negotiated. It had to be earned through action and demonstrated through excellence. She had earned it for herself and for all of humanity with her skill and determination. Captain Morrison walked beside her as they returned to their ship. Amy, how did you know this would work out? Amy smiled and hefted the ceremonial rifle that marked her new status as a Zephyrian. War Master, Captain, I didn't know it would work out. I just knew I had to try.